Good evening. For the first time, we can show you pictures from the heart of northwest Queensland's cattle crisis. 7 News has been on the ground in flooded Julia Creek and Richmond, and the situation is worse than first feared.
We warn the pictures are confronting, but farmers say people need to see them to understand the gravity of the situation.
The scenes are heartbreaking. Death and despair, paddock after paddock. Hard to watch as it is. It's even harder when this is your livelihood rotting in mud. But graziers want you to see it.
Well, it breaks your heart.
This is the first look inside the Richmond region. Cattle farmer Alastair McClymont doesn't know how many head he's lost, but knows the result of this disaster.
It's a knockout punch. Drought chokes you. It slowly chokes you. But this it's a big flat and it knocks you. Some people won't get up, unfortunately.
The roads between Richmond and Julia Creek are underwater, making recovery near impossible, and so a frantic mission to support stranded families and cattle goes on. For those animals that survived the floods, starvation and exposure to reach higher ground, time is running out.
We're still trying to keep cattle alive, as you can see, and they're a mess. And some of them aren't responding to treatment that's too far gone, you know.
Losses now estimated at 500,000 animals and into the billions of dollars. In isolated Julia Creek, the scenes are no better, the death immeasurable. Property owner Matt Benito doesn't want to do his own count.
Honestly, hate having to show these images. It's really hard for people to see them themselves. But it's probably the only way that we can communicate what's happening.
The community is gathering to support each other and find out what help is coming their way.
You will be surprised how tough and resilient these people are, and they will come back, but they're not going to come back without that.
Ultimately, the death of these cattle will have a far greater financial impact than simply hurting the graziers who have lost them. This is income. This is money that now won't be spent with local businesses, so the flow-on effects become so much more devastating. Making the hit harder, farmers know in a few weeks their paddocks will be full and green. What they need is cattle to fill them. They're asking for government assistance and money to restock.
We contribute in a massive way to the economy, and if you want us to stay here, you're going to have to help us. It's as simple as that.
Before it's simply too late.
And Joel, how quickly can help reach them?
Well, Sharon, principally here in Julia Creek, the only way help and supplies is getting in is by air, and that is because all of the main roads in and out of town are either still underwater or are like this one, completely destroyed by the flooding.
Sarah Greenhalgh, how devastating could stock losses be?
Sharon, these poor graziers just can't catch a break. They say this is a disaster and fear it could be bad enough to even ruin some of the smaller producers. The toughest part at the moment is these cattle are stranded and simply cannot be reached. Defence Force aircraft should hopefully be arriving tomorrow with hay on board from places like South East Queensland and Moree. And over the next few days, they will be conducting fodder drops to isolated properties. They've survived years of devastating drought only to suffer and succumb to days of rain.
And everybody was going to be short of cattle numbers anyway this year after the drought, and so they look like to be even more short now.
Flooded paddocks are inaccessible.
Never seen this before.
Winds strong, feed scarce. Ag Force expects financially livestock losses will be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The emotional toll harder to gauge.
We're only small, we've only got about 400 cows. We're close to knowing all of them by name, so we don't really want to be out shooting them, but that's what it's coming to at the moment because there's just nothing for them to eat and they're going down in the bog and not getting back up.
Councils have compiled lists of the worst affected properties in places like Julia Creek. They're the priority when fodder drops start.
We're starting to get some great support from the state and the federal governments with commitment to fodder drops.
There will be help on the way. It may not be big enough or good enough, but that help is on the way.
At Charters Towers, a makeshift helipad, Wayne Pritchard and his family are chartering people and food across the flooded Flinders Highway.
Oh geez, we've lost count now, probably 100 per day.
In Hughenden, the Flinders River still rages. 10 days ago, they needed this rain so badly, no one would have imagined they'd be praying for the sun to come back out. The silver lining is that it has now reached some drought-stricken towns further south. At Winton, a site locals have longed to see. 45 millimetres fell in 24 hours, 59 over Longreach, but still for others, there's a long road ahead. In Cloncurry, Sarah Greenolch, 7 News. Drought one day, flood the next as water now flows through remote Queensland. Almost a year's worth of rain bringing an outback waterfall to life.
It's only like this for a few days while it rains, and then it dries up and it ends up, bone dry. It looks like we're in Cairns or up in the Daintree or something.
It's actually halfway between Cloncurry and Mount Isa on Eddie Campbell's family property, literally his own backyard.
It's not like this for very long.
A temporary tourist attraction from a rain event no one out west expected to last this long.
Some of the early forecasts were really promising, but when some of the falls have got up to, especially over 100 mils a night, it's caught people by surprise.
After receiving a record 200 plus mils overnight, Julia Creek is an inland island. For some communities, the celebrations have now ended. Weak and even strong livestock are now being exposed to what graziers say are critical conditions. They're cold, wet and possibly without feed, while access to some paddocks is restricted on the ground and in the air.
To the angels in the sky now, helping desperate farmers in the state's northwest. An army of pilots is dropping food to stranded properties, helping feed starving cattle.
In the skies of the northwest, this is the sound of salvation. Small choppers performing a massive job with life still on the line.
Unless they see it themselves, I guess no one can understand the enormity of it.
An army of civilian machines and expert bush pilots going sun up to sun down, dropping food to stranded property and starving cattle. Dane Crocker says the sights he's seen will endure.
It's very confronting. I mean, we got our own cattle too, and know what it's like. But yeah, it's very confronting. It catches up with you after a few days, or if you get time to think about it.
But there's not much time to think. Properties are still surrounded, air rescue the only option. Desperate animals remain in the water. So pilots from around the country keep coming and the long hours go on.
You need to hook in and go. Desperate times, you just go. That's it. That's all you can do.
For a lot of the isolated stations and the workers on them, these helicopters and the pilots are their only personal link to the outside world. And the longer that goes on, there are growing concerns for their mental health.
Yeah, not good. Yeah, some of them are really struggling.
The Agriculture Minister flew in today, bringing mental health experts to assist.
The psychological impact both on children but also on adults can last for a long period of time.
You just got to keep on keeping on.
In the air, that help is still coming.
And Joel, what extra resources are the government offering the region?
Well, Sharon, as well as the mental health services being offered to the families and the chopper pilots, the Agriculture Minister is on the ground to try to work out what more they may need. Unfortunately, making that difficult is the fact that graziers say it could be up to 4 months before they have an accurate number on the livestock that has been lost. Of course, the big question everyone wants to know is, are they going to get assistance to clean them up? On that front, the Minister says there are plans being formulated to utilise outside resources, outside assets to help the people of this region with that very difficult task.
This rain keeps tumbling down. Some producers have already lost 80% of their stock. They say unless they can get food on the ground in the next 24 hours, they'll lose the rest.
It's hard to believe this is the middle of the Queensland outback. Now an inland ocean covering hundreds of thousands of acres. 11 days ago, they were dry, dusty paddocks.
There's a white collie tank there, see, it's just digging down the water, so that means there's about 2 metres of water there.
For the first time, we can show you north of Julia Creek, where 3 flooded river systems meet. Properties are surrounded, fence lines barely visible, and countless livestock lost.
These are tough people, the poor buggers.
7 News was on board as a local grazier, along with the Federal Agriculture Minister, witnessed the extent of this disaster firsthand.
Absolutely devastating. What we need to do is give them what they need and get the hell out of their lives and let them do it. because they know best.
At Bernard Station, they've endured 6 years, receiving half their annual rainfall. 2019 has brought a year's worth in 8 days.
And for the last few days, it's been bordering on cold for us, and what has happened in the paddock is pretty catastrophic.
We're hearing stories of people on the where there's more black soil downs, heavier country, reporting 100% losses.
Enough to ruin some producers. Flying into Cloncurry this afternoon, the Premier said the situation out west is far worse than she imagined.
I spoke to a couple that had to be rescued from the top of their roof today. You know, that's been an ordeal for them. And as far as the eye can see, there are dead cattle everywhere.
Graziers say for those animals stranded in water and black soil, fodder drops could actually make the situation worse. But for those that have managed to make it to higher, harder ground, hay can't come soon enough.
Fodder drops in some areas would be very beneficial, but it needs to happen in a hurry.
Elsewhere in Richmond, water has exceeded the 1974 flood level and it's still rising.
That's going to mean that major flooding will continue for the next few days.
But the situation is still very grave.
With so many outback roads still cut, graziers are taking to the sky, stoic men and women torn apart by what they're seeing.
Just what we've seen around here is pretty devastating.
I've had people sitting beside me, flying around looking at their cattle, and you just can imagine what's going through their mind zone.
Their livelihoods wiped out.
I'll never even try to understand what they're going through, because they're the salt of the earth, these people, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart, the people I've met, and they work so hard, and the hardship and disappointment that they're facing.
Fodder drops to surviving cattle are happening where feasible. Locals are moving fast. There's no time to wait for government assistance.
I think a lot of places it's already too late.
Fuel is running low in some towns. People need food too. At the Blue Heeler pub in Kainoona, south of Julia Creek, they're distributing groceries donated by Woolworths and Coles. It's chop it out to stations to families who are stranded.
Gives you a sense of, relief that they've at least got some access to some products.
These are some of the stronger animals that didn't get bogged or washed away after making it to solid ground. For now, the priority is keeping them alive. But with so many dead, next comes the grim task of cleaning up paddocks.
You can see it in their faces, they're heartbroken.
The northwest woke to sunshine and blue skies, but these are dark days. Graziers are hurting.
You can see cow after cow after cow. Anything that's down and can't get up now, it isn't going to get up.
Even on properties that aren't flooded, countless cattle are dead after being exposed to the elements. The losses are extreme.
I mean, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 dead cows there.
Calves left without mothers.
I could see him there, and the side that he was lying on after 10 days in the rain and the cold wind was frozen, and I stood him up and tried to get his circulation going, but you know that it wasn't going to work.
Some areas further north are still underwater. Roger Jeffress is delivering avgas to choppers, conducting confronting aerial assessments. For one farmer, it became too much.
He had run out of bullets shooting bog cattle, and he saw a paddock with nothing left in it. And I've never seen, he was white and just staring into the distance and quite shocked.
And after that, there will be a meeting at the local pub where everyone is welcome, and I expect there the PM will hear some incredible stories and also meet some extraordinary people, just like the ones we did today. When you've almost lost them all, saving one cow hardly seems cause to smile. But this is Beryl.
There would have been a few upset people around, I think, if Beryl had died.
Orphaned at birth, Beryl the Brahman's been one of the Webster family ever since. The hug-loving, house-dwelling, couch potato cow even became an internet superstar, her unusual bovine behaviour going global.
She means heaps to us. She's a character in her own right.
But the Webster's Belutha station, north of Julia Creek, is in the heart of the flooding disaster region. They thought they'd lost Beryl until Jake found her, dragging her home through water.
When Jake called on the two-way and said she was alive, we were very, very emotional. It was just something really nice to get out of out of everything.
95% of their stock perished. Beryl, one bright spot in a dark time.
Pretty astronomical, really, for everyone.
Dark times many have endured alone. 70-year-old Annie Stephen hasn't seen another human for 2 weeks. Isolated on the family station, she's been walking the paddocks with feed, water and a gun, helping cattle where she can.
You just grit your teeth. I mean, that's what you got to do, and, you know, it's no good dwelling on it because it makes it worse. So you just, you know, get on with it.
For most of the properties in this area, the rescue mission is starting to wind down. They have saved all the cattle they can. Attention is now turning to cleaning up the dead ones and ultimately beginning to think about the very long road to rebuilding and recovering. And on that front, they say they will need a lot of help.
The government really have to step in now and help financially.
To help an industry survive. The nation's leader in the middle of a national crisis.
I'm sorry. Far more devastating and far more widespread, and it requires a much broader and more comprehensive response.
At Julia Creek, small business owners outline the battle they now face with the cattle industry on its knees.
If the graziers aren't getting the support, then they can't pay the bills, and then that just comes back to us then.
Extra $25,000 grants announced today will help. The Prime Minister admits today isn't about making big announcements, but seeing the devastation for himself and listening to stories. But he says a substantial assistance package is coming, not in months or weeks, but soon, and it will be big.
This is my number one priority right here, right now.
And for these resilient people, it can't come soon enough.
I think it's hit home with everyone pretty hard, mate. She's, it's set in all right.